This worksheet has been developed to introduce you to the reader response theory of understanding literature, which we'll use throughout the semester. I'll navigate this worksheet to give you an idea of what I'll be looking for, but first I'll kind of explain what reader response theory is. Reader response theory is based on the idea that the relationship between a text and a reader is a transactional one, meaning there's a give and take between the two. It considers a reader's reaction to literature as being vital to interpreting the meaning of a text. For example, what questions does a reader have about the story and the author? What background or beliefs is a reader bringing to a text that might influence how he or she reads it? Reader response theory examines how the interaction of a text and reader create meaning. For example, each reading of a text and each reader of that text is unique. Each reading involves a particular reader in a particular time and place, and there are, of course, gender, socioeconomic, ethnic, and cultural differences at work in the act of reading. Each generation of readers also brings a new perspective to a text, new understandings, new questions, and new interests. Reader response theory asks readers to think about, what are you responding to? How do you interpret something? What interests you about a text? What questions do you have? And you can see that this worksheet has all of those things as part of it. So when you approach a text, in this case, we're looking at The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, write down the first things that occur to you. Perhaps the first thing that occurs to you with this text is you're not going to like it because it's about war. Or maybe the first thing occurs to you as you start reading it that some of these things that the men are carrying have nothing to do with war. Maybe you're starting to think about whether or not the author is actually Lieutenant Cross himself. Then start thinking about specific questions that arise in your head. Perhaps you might think about why Lieutenant Cross is carrying the letters with him if they're a distraction. Maybe you're thinking about, does Martha actually love Lieutenant Cross? Maybe you're thinking about, is there going to be some items that are not actually military items that they're carrying as you start getting into it more and more? Some of the things I want you to think about for every story in terms of reader response are your reading strategies. And since most of you thought that rereading a text is going to be helpful, I'd like you to think about, how does a second reading change your understanding of the stories? In this section where you're going to put your responses, I'd like you to give exact line numbers of where perhaps you went back and saw something differently or understood something differently. Perhaps initially you didn't understand why Lieutenant Cross had to burn Martha's letters, but then you went back to page 406 and you read, he pictured Martha's smooth young face, thinking he loved her more than his men, and now Ted Lavender was dead because he loved her so much. Perhaps that was only something you understood in your second reading. In cultural studies, are there historical references or cultural references in a text that are unfamiliar to you? Certainly in this story, there are references to Vietnam, which might be unfamiliar to you. There are references to some kind of military equipment. For example, on page 406, they all carried at least one M18 colored smoke grenade, 24 ounces. Perhaps you didn't really understand what an M18 colored smoke grenade looked like. Perhaps it's something you wondered about and want to look up. In terms of building a critical inquiry, that's where we really develop our critical thinking skills and critical reading skills. When you start thinking about what questions you have for the author, perhaps you would like to ask Tim O'Brien, did he ever lose anyone close to him or a family member in war, because he writes so clearly about Ted Lavender's death? You might want to think about what questions you'd like to research online. Perhaps you don't know a lot about the time and place of the Vietnam War, and so you might indicate some of the things you'd like to research here. Your response overall to the work, how might you respond to the message about war that Tim O'Brien is depicting here? How would you characterize that attitude towards war and why? Again, try to find some exact um, lines from the text. For example, on page 418, um, he writes, "It was very sad," he thought, "the things the men carried inside, the things men did or felt they had to do." What are your own feelings about war, and have they changed as a result of reading the story? This is the kind of reader response worksheet that we're going to be using throughout the semester, and I hope this little overview of it as it relates to the things they carried by Tim O'Brien has been helpful to you as you begin to read the story and respond to it in the reader response approach.